Hey guys, it's Tom Barclay here. I'm at Tottenham's training ground, but I'm in the car today. There is quite a bit going on around the pitches, so I can't actually film this. I'm doing it here. You can see the Spurs bus actually behind me in the background. And to be fair, last time I did a video here, there were a few complaints about the lawnmowers in the background, so perhaps it's better in here, Alan Partridge style. But anyway, I've just been at Ange Postecoglou's press conference ahead of Aston Villa, in which he was in very chirpy mood, very sort of jovial and happy. He can often be more like that pre-match rather than after games, but yeah, very noticeable how happy he was. Perhaps he was just buoyed by that fantastic win over Man City in the week, perhaps. Or the fact that the news regarding Micky Van de Ven, which is the only place to start, perhaps it isn't as bad as people were worrying about from what he said. So obviously when he came off, he did manage to sort of walk off, so that was a good indicator that it wasn't terrible, but given Van de Ven's hamstring history and how much it derailed Tottenham's season last year when he got injured against Chelsea, I'm sure all fans were fearing the worst. But the news today from Ange Postecoglou is that it is a strained hamstring, but it's not serious, and it should probably keep him out till after the international break. Which, given the situation that Spurs fans were probably facing up to with their Player of the Year last year, an absolute key part of Ange's team, they'll take that. Regarding other injury news, might as well start with that. Romero and Werner, who both came off in the game as well with fatigue effectively, were apparently sore, but they have a chance for Sunday. Have a chance didn't sound particularly promising when you think of it that way, but I'd imagine, particularly with Van de Ven out, that you'd think it would take a lot to keep Romero out of that game, because otherwise they're missing the two first choice centre backs. And then with Son, who obviously missed the last two games with a hamstring problem, he trained today, which is Friday. I'm trying to get my days mixed up. So many matches at the moment, press conferences. And that if he comes through training on Saturday, he should be okay for the game. So you kind of be expecting Son to come back, which is what the sort of prognosis was before. So that would be big to have the captain back for a key game against Villa. There was a bit more information about Wilson Odobert's injury. So obviously he's out after suffering a reoccurrence of that hamstring problem that forced him off against Coventry in the Carabao Cup. Quite a while ago now. Not great news on that. I mean, he had already said that it was a serious sort of setback, but he was a bit more detailed on it, and that is over the nature of it. And they said because of it being a reoccurrence of the same injury, they're going to have to be quite conservative with it. So the likelihood is it will keep him out for as long as it kept him out the first time, if not longer. So what was that, 5-6 weeks? So that's bad news, unfortunately, for Wilson Odobert. And suddenly the options, out left, with Werner having a few issues, they're not quite as plentiful as perhaps they were before. So yeah, shame for Wilson Odobert as he tries to sort of make his mark, having signed from Burnley in the summer, but obviously only 19. Plenty of time for him to sort of show what he can do here. Maybe it's worth talking about Radu Dragusin now, given him playing as a consequence of Van de Ven being injured, and perhaps Romero as well. And so obviously Ange was asked about him. So let's start off with his comments about Dragusin. He talked about how he's obviously been signed, he's been there with them 10 months. He feels like he's been doing great. He feels like he's really embracing the way Tottenham plays. Obviously come from another league and adapting, and he's still very young, particularly for a centre back. And they feel like the same with the doggy, same with Van de Ven, is that they can grow from here. And he likes what he's seen from Dragusin, and he was particularly praiseworthy of his performance against Man City, which I think most fans were very impressed with, how well he dealt with him. And Postecoglou's praise of Dragusin for that particular game was quite specific. It wasn't just the football, as he put it. It was how he dealt with all the injuries that were happening around him. So suddenly that back four, already got you already had Archie Gray filling in at right back, who's done very, very well, but is obviously a teenager himself, and was coming up against a player who I think's probably going to starting to tear up at City, particularly with all their injuries, in Nunez. So that was a challenge for him. And the way that Dragusin dealt with, coping with an inexperienced fullback next to him, and then having the other players drop out like Romero, he was impressed with that. And I have to say, yeah, it was perhaps his best game so far, or one of his best games in a Tottenham shirt, which So far, I feel, onto my sort of thoughts about Dragusin. It must be difficult. You could have gone to Bayern Munich. You've signed for Tottenham. You've bought into the project, but you kind of know, as much as Ange is loath to sort of have any, or what would Mourinho call them sort of undroppable players, a different word he used, but like he doesn't want to have sort of guaranteed first team players. And in fact, I might do a video on his embargo section later because we've got onto that subject. But he is really, in reality, right now behind in the pecking order. But he's a full Romanian international. He's got big ambitions. It's not a surprise every so often that sort of noises come up in the press abroad about other interests from other clubs. And he's had to bide his time. And to be honest, when he has played, he's been a mixed bag. He was very good against Man City, but I remember his debut at Fulham. That was pretty dreadful. He got torn apart by, I think it was Muniz that day. He obviously got sent off against Karabag with a pretty unnecessary action, I suppose, in that game. So it's been stop-start. But this is a big chance for him now, with Van de Ven injured, to really show why they've signed him, what he can bring to the party on a consistent basis. So yeah, big game for Dragusin coming up. To talk about another player who, if we're talking about Dragusin being inconsistent, this player has been the most consistent out of all Spurs players this season, and is maybe in the conversation for one of the best players in the Premier League right now on form, is Dejan Kulusevski. Kulusevski's pretty much every game been a talking point, playing so well, fantastic against Man City. He actually spoke to the press after the game in quotes that were run yesterday about various things. One talking about how Tottenham really need to sort of get better with away from home against physical teams like Palace. It's one thing playing at City where he feels like it actually suits Tottenham quite a lot, the way they play, but that's where they need to improve. And I couldn't sort of agree with him more on that front. That is really where Spurs have been sort of falling down in the last sort of 6 months more or so. But he also talked about how he really wants to raise his game against City, particularly on a personal level. He feels like that's the game where he really wants to, that mean more to him than other matches. And we've seen that with some of the goals he scored from away from home, and particularly the other night, he was fantastic once again in the middle. It's been a revelation, really, having him in that position. And Andrew was asked about that specifically, about playing him in the number 10 position, and how he sort of, or number 8, number 10, that kind of midfield central area, and how it came to happen, really. And Ange said a lot of it was kind of due to discovery, kind of trial and error to a certain extent. He felt like he knew that Kulusevski always had those attributes to play inside, and how playing out wide, Postecoglou has kind of come to the realization that it just doesn't really actually suit Kulusevski's mentality more than anything, because Kulusevski is the kind of player who wants to be involved all the time. And a big part, as Ange put it, of being a wide player is the discipline to not be involved all the time, to often have to wait and bide your time. And it just doesn't really suit the way Kulusevski likes to play the game. So it's not like it was just one big grand plan from the off, but it's where they've got to, and it's working really, really well. Although interestingly, I've said a few times, I remember being in Israel for pre-season a couple of years ago, speaking to Kulusevski in a press conference alongside my good friend Ali Gold. He might have asked the question actually about his favourite position, and he said back then it was number 10. And he talked a lot about how he grew up playing number 10, and it's only recently he's played out wide. So I wonder if Postecoglou may have had a conversation with him about his favourite position, a while ago. But I don't know. Depends. Knowing Postecoglou, probably not. He sort of deals by his own. He goes by his own sort of decisions rather than ruling by democracy. Put it that way. So moving on. All right. He was obviously Aston Villa now the weekend. Another big game, another exciting game for Spurs, as it seems to be at the moment. And there's a bit of, I don't know about needle, but there's a bit of an extra element going into this game for fans, with obviously Villa pipped Spurs to fourth place last season in the Champions League. He was asked about Unai Emery, who he just thinks has been an unbelievable appointment for Aston Villa, and feels like it's a cautionary tale, was the words he used, for writing people off. Obviously, after referencing Arsenal and how he was kind of derided, wasn't he, Emery, particularly for the old good evening stuff, made to look like a bit of a joke figure off the back of being the manager who took over from Wenger. And not doing great, to be honest, but not doing as badly as was portrayed. And at Villa, he's just been unbelievable. And for a lot of people's money, including, I think, Dave Kidd, my chief sports writer, I think he wrote it, being pound for pound the best manager in the league. When it's definitely an argument to be said for that. He's been fantastic. And actually, interestingly, one of the press conferences I missed when I was off, Ange talked about how basically no manager turns around a club in 15 months apart from Pep. Well, actually, thinking about it, Unai Emery did. Think of where they were under Steven Gerrard when he left, and where they are now, and where they seem to still be going and progressing and doing fantastically in the Champions League, and building sort of competition amongst the players, and Duran and Watkins and all over the pitch. They've got fantastic, sort of exciting young players who can get better. He was talked a bit about his impact, and also how he hopes to ensure a miserable birthday for Emery on Sunday. So Emery's birthday on Sunday, by a good result. He was obviously having a bit of fun there when he was teed up by that question. He was also asked about the top four, regarding obviously Villa nicking it last year, and whether he would take top four basically over a trophy, which is the sort of unwritten rule, I guess, for a lot of clubs, if not managers, it seems. And he batted that away in only the way that Postecoglou would, easily, just saying, "No way, I want it all, which was probably a soundbite you might see off the back of that press conference, because it was very, very Ange in the way he delivered it. But the other one he might get regarding a soundbite is this funny analogy that Ange came up with, which I'm not sure he was completely committed to as he was saying it. But it was the context is his style of play, which obviously he knows, and as he's pointed out, that until they win something or have success with it, will always be the sort of stick to beat him with when it doesn't go well. When it goes brilliantly, everyone's behind it. But when you get a bad performance and people feel that he's being too gung-ho, or whatever you might call about it, he knows that's where the criticism is going to come from, which is fair enough. And he used the phrase, the analogy he used was a garden analogy, saying, if you want a beautiful garden, you've got to handle some fertilizer. By then quickly going on about how he doesn't know anything about gardening. But the point being is that to sort of plant these seeds and get them to grow, you've got to go through some shit, I suppose. you've got to deal with some things that are not so nice, and that's sort of getting things right and trying to put in place his plan for the way the team plays. And you're going to have some bad, difficult results which are pretty unpalatable, I suppose, like Crystal Palace, if you're going to get where you want to get. I guess it depends on the here and now, really, whether that's important or it's about a long-term solution. I mean, he knows how often managers don't last for that long. He knows better than anyone, I suppose. But yet he is still continuing to consistently talking about this message about how he's trying to set up Tottenham for the long-term future. And again, as I've said consistently throughout these videos, it's up to fans whether they sort of buy into that rhetoric. I think I do. Or whether you think it's sort of manager speak, sort of giving him an out when things don't go so well. But the only thing you can definitely say about him is he's been consistent with that message throughout. It's something he seems to truly believe in. And this was just another quite colourful way of expressing that particular opinion. So on to the game itself, Villa. Huge. I mean, Villa obviously lost in the League Cup in the week, unlike Spurs, but they've overall had a fantastic season. They seem to bounce back from bad results very, very well. Kind of like how Tottenham have, to be honest, this season. Emery's got them playing some great football. There's great competition now between Watkins and Duran, and the likes of Morgan Rogers obviously playing really well. All over the pitch there are threats for Spurs. And when you look at the games they've played last season against them, obviously Spurs won 4-0 away from home, but it was a weird game. I think Villa were pretty good in the first half, and then suddenly Spurs blitzed them in the second half. And this was just before this bad run from Tottenham's point of view. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was convincing as the scoreline was suggested. And conversely, the one they lost 2-1, they obviously went 1-0 ahead from Gio Lo Celso, and ended up losing from a set piece, and then Watkins scored. But actually, Spurs should have been 3 or 4-0 up within the first 20 minutes. It was during that period where they were blitzing teams at the start of games and played really well, so they could probably consider themselves hard done by on that occasion. But it felt more like Emery's kind of savviness really sort of came up trumps in that particular match. And it'll be interesting to see how the teams have grown from there for this particular game. Both teams seem to concede quite a lot of goals, so I would expect more goals in this match. And yeah, I guess it's a bit of a battle as well between the two understudies to Harry Kane of Solanke and Watkins. Solanke obviously not scored in 6 games. Actually hasn't had a shot on target in the last 6 games, but is still playing really well, which is interesting. In fact, that is a big topic of the embargo section, which I may do a video on later to get into that and Ange's thoughts on that particular subject. But Watkins, is a class act at this level, and that if it's not working for him, they've got Duran off the bench. So it's going to be a fascinating game. When it comes to the likely lineup, there was a few doubts, aren't there? I mean, it's a little bit tricky to call it at this point. So obviously, Vicario goes in goal. You imagine Porro comes back in at right back. And we know Dragusin will play without Van de Ven. But I imagine Romero will find a way of getting through. If it's not him, probably Davis, the centre-back. I don't think Gray's ready to sort of start centre-back in that particular role. You'd think it'd be Davis. And if Davis fits in anywhere under Postecoglou, it's at centre-back. Doesn't seem to fit in at left-back. And the fact that it wasn't him who came on when Van de Ven got injured to play left back sort of underlines that fact that I think Postecoglou has realised that Davis just isn't going to suit that particular role, that the way he likes to have his left backs to play. And then Udogie, obviously, at left back, who they keep trying to rest in these European games or cup competitions and failing to be able to make it happen because of injuries to other players. Then there's a big question mark between Bentancur and Bissouma. Both played a big part in the win over City. Bissouma coming off the bench and having a vital role in keeping the ball off the line in the second half. And it was interesting to see both of them play together, something we might want to see a bit more. So I guess you couldn't rule out that. Them both starting, but you probably think not. And the way they're playing, I think it's a toss-up between the two of them. Kulusevski obviously has to play at the moment. And then Maddison, I mean, this is a bit of a talking point at another point, not today, but about where he lies in the whole sort of pecking order at the moment. Is interesting. He obviously didn't play at all against City, so you'd think he would start, but I think Pape Sarr is really pushing for involvement. He's just playing so well at the moment, so it probably might well be a horses for courses situation, and what Postecoglou feels like he needs from his team, whether it's more running power from Sarr, albeit he's been contributing brilliantly with goals and assists, or it's the more sort of maybe more of a playmaking ability of Maddison. We'll see. Up front, obviously, Johnson starts to the right. Solanke, I can't imagine Richarlison dislodging him. And then you'd think Son, if he gets through, will come back in. So back to full strength. And, Son, so it's quite a good sort of finish on this. There was a nice interview, which I think will be out tomorrow, but there have been clips of it already on BBC website, Football Focus, with Brennan Johnson, talking about various different things, including his own form, including how he feels really confident about winning a trophy this season. But the one line that sort of stood out, and something that I wrote up for the paper because I thought it was good enough for that, was the fact that when he was asked about his idols by Kelly Summers, he referenced Kaká and Zidane because he used to play centrally, but actually mentioned Son and the fact that he was watching him a lot, but even before he came to Tottenham, because of the goals he scores, the movement he has. And he's not quite sure if Son is aware of his kind of admiration for him, but probably does think that he is because of the questions he asks. And it just sort of underlines again how Son, who seems to be one of those most underrated top players around, I don't really know why, particularly when you think he's like the joint 19th highest scorer in the Premier League ever, is regarded with the right kind of respect from his fellow pros, including one of his teammates who seems to idolise him. So that's a nice point to finish. And let's see how they can get on against Villa at the weekend. I'll be doing one of these videos after the game. And it'll be fascinating to see whether we're going to be in a state of, right, let's go again with this whole Postecoglou project, particularly off the back of City, if they get a good win, or if there's going to be more question marks again, which seems to be a recurring theme throughout this season. But let's see.